Live. Thank you very much for joining me, everyone. Charles Moscowitz here. Monday through Friday, 12 noon to 1 p.m. Today at 1 p.m. I'll also be joined by David, who's a regular guest of mine, and we tend to discuss Judaism and America and Israel and how all of these things intersect. This is a live program, and in that capacity, I'm taking your calls. So you're welcome to join the conversation. 617, let me just get TikTok up here. 617 396 4958. What is on your mind this afternoon? Let me just go to this. I mean, I got my cell phone is doing all these funny things today. I don't know if it's a bug. Once in a while, this seems to happen where it just shuts down, then it goes back on, and that goes on for a day or two, and then things get somewhat back to normal. 617 396 4958 is the number. 617 396 4958. I'm looking forward to doing this program live and having interaction and call-ins and discussions, and looks like TikTok just ain't happening here. So maybe I'll have to forget TikTok. Let's just see if it settles down. There are so many issues right now that I'd like to delve into. And if we had a normal society, I would be able to, at least a normal by American standards, I would be able to delve into them. But because of the censorship right now, and because of the slide toward fascism that we've experienced, particularly since the installation of the present regime, it is very difficult to proceed in a responsible way. Now, I'm not one to engage in, frankly, in irresponsible type of talk that would be a violation of any conventional definition of community standards. I know something about community standards. I have been a radio talk show host, Steve Jacobs, off and on for, this isn't going to work. Okay, fine. No TikTok. Just as well. They probably will shut me down. I've been a radio talk show host on small stations in Greater Boston for the better part of the last 20 years. And when you're a radio host, you understand what community standards are. You understand what the Federal Communications Commission standards are in terms of what is appropriate for your community and what isn't. And in that capacity, I think most of my colleagues in talk radio, would go beyond that. We would go the nth degree in terms of observing what is appropriate for the market that we're serving. You have to remember that a radio station is a business. They have to sell advertising. You have an ad team in the same building that you're operating. You have to look people in the eye. You have to talk to board ops, and you've got a manager and even an owner and other administrators at the station. It's a red brick building, and you're in there doing a radio show. So, yeah, you have to observe standards. And I learned how to do that, not perfectly, but, well enough. And so I understand what community standards are, and I also understand what the FCC regulation is, which is why, speaking from my experience, I think I can safely say that what we're dealing with now is not community standards, but it's censorship. Big tech has decided that they do not like certain opinions expressed, and they've decided that they're going to either shadow ban those opinions or have them outright banned. Aksum Bokhari, he's a reporter with Breitbart, wrote a book on the topic. I had him on my show, and he reports that the big tech companies actually got together after the election of Donald Trump, and they decided to conduct a policy so that would never happen again by doing just as I just described, shadow banning and outright censoring and banning opinion that don't agree with them. Now, these big tech companies, and I'm on one right now, so I want to be careful. They got some kind of a congressional exemption back in the 1990s when the internet was still in its early stages that basically gave them immunity from prosecution, and it gave them a lot of other fine print leeway in terms of controlling and censoring their content and protection by the government under the guise that they would censor, and rightfully, activities that were criminal, like child porn and pedophilia and violence and terror groups, which is something, by the way, that I would suggest, haven't done a very good job of doing. But either way, those are violations of community standards. That's a reasonable and indeed an appropriate element of regulation. It's what Supreme Court Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes referred to as, yelling fire in a crowded theater. We have freedom of speech, but that doesn't mean you can go out and actually engage in speech that would hurt people directly, individuals that you can actually point to. But they have taken that to the area of political censorship. And people say, well, they're private companies. Well, fine. Then they should take away this congressional protection and compete on the open market. And there are companies that are coming up and challenging them. I'm on Gab, I'm on BitChute, I'm on this not new tube, whatever. That one doesn't work that well. And I'm on a bunch of other venues. So my response has been to try to diversify the program so that if one of them takes me down, I'll be on the others. But the bottom line is that they don't really have much of a share of the market. That's the truth at the end of the day. The big tech conglomerates, YouTube, Google, Facebook, Twitter, they control, I think it's safe to say, 95 to 97% of the market. So while technically they are private, even though they do have special government exemptions, in the de facto sense, they are a monopoly. And I think that it's more than a coincidence to suggest that they all move alike. They all think alike. They're all birds, as they used to say back in the 1940s and 50s. They are birds of a feather who flock together. And they are censoring out opinions that don't agree with them. Now, this isn't new. I would suggest that in the 1960s, you had this. You had three major networks, and all three of them basically would parrot the same stories. Very little difference. Very little conservative opinion would be able to work its way into the mix. Very little ultra left-wing opinion would either. I mean, by the way, they weren't exactly promoting communism. And that you had, like, Walter Cronkite sit up there on his perch and declare that's the way it is, right? In other words, he gets to decide what is news and what isn't. And I think historian Douglas Brinkley, in his biography of Cronkite, kind of blew the whistle on Cronkite in terms of how left-wing he was. The point is that there wasn't any actual diversity of opinion. There wasn't any genuine trust in the basic wisdom of the American citizen to express themselves. And there wasn't any real competition. It was all sort of controlled in terms of alternative outlets and alternative media being able to raise to a certain level that they could wield a certain degree of influence. It did happen, but it was very, very difficult and very controlled. And, this is something that, in a more openly totalitarian society, there's no bones about that. I mean, the government decides exactly who publishes and what they publish. There is a complete I mean, in a communist country, there is no freedom of the press at all. The government itself is the press, just like the government itself is the corporation. I mean, there's no pretension. That's what communism is: public ownership of the means of communication, public ownership of the mode of production. The government, in other words, which is the public, operating as the public, they own and they control everything. And there's no kind of fig leaf at all. It's just what it is. In a more fascist country, which is a little less left wing, you have a collusion between the government and select media outlets, select businesses, who basically work together to run the show. I mean, for example, Mussolini he had what was called a council of corporations, which was the equivalent to what we have in this country in a Congress. They weren't elected, and they were basically a group of select corporations who ran the government in partnership with the dictator. That's a fascist state. And Mussolini, of course, referred to his form of government as the Third Way, which was, in other words, it wasn't outright communist, it wasn't outright Bolshevik, of which he was. He started out that way. But it wasn't freedom. It wasn't capitalism. It wasn't democracy. It wasn't a republic. It was a state that was halfway. It was half one and half the other, is generally what fascism is. And the United States was the exception. We had these levels of freedom, and now we don't. Now we have censorship. And there are all these things that I'd like to talk about today, but I know that if I do, I'm going to get taken down. And that's frustrating. It's depressing, actually. I am going to try to get into a few of them in a very careful way, with the hope that I don't get completely shut down. And I'm also going to give out the phone number if you'd like to call in. I have in front of me my dashboard from Restream. And on that dashboard, I am on a lot of different stations simultaneously. It's amazing, actually. Let me list them: Picardo, Trovo, VK, DLive, and Twitch. And then, of course, the more famous ones are YouTube, LinkedIn, Facebook, and Periscope, which is basically a feed into Twitter. And I can control the dashboard in that if I get into something that I think is a little too controversial for YouTube, something that they censor, I can flick YouTube off and continue the show. I don't know if I have to do that with Facebook. So far, Facebook, I don't think they have outright censored me. They have shadow banned me, but at least so far, my videos have remained on Facebook. So, probably because they don't know who the hell I am. I mean, I'm not big enough to pay attention to. I don't know, whatever, for whatever reason, I'm still up there. So I'm going to proceed with a couple of topics here that I think might be hot buttons. And I'm going to do it in a euphemistic way because I'm going to trust the intelligence of my listeners to know that what I'm talking about. And I will also ask you, the viewer, if you're going to call in, to be careful as well. So before I launch into these things, 617-396-4958 is the phone number. This is a live program. You are welcome to join the conversation. 617-396, excuse me, 4958. Now, the first thing I want to bring up is this very issue of censorship, which was addressed yesterday by President Trump, who gave a press conference at the Badminton Golf Club where he is living in New Jersey, in which he announced, along with several attorneys, that he is filing a class action lawsuit against Google, Twitter, and Facebook. And he named them by name. He noted that they had removed him from their servers in a way that constitutes censorship, which is un-American, and that they, as such, had violated this section of this number 250, this law passed by Congress, which gave them special protection. They had become essentially a censor. There are other cases, by the way, right now where apparently, at least with Twitter, they had maintained a relationship with state governments around the country, so that state governments, and I assume that includes Republican, probably not, but it might, could contact them and have their opponents' views taken off of Twitter, which is censorship and which is violation of the Constitution. It's a violation all the way back to the Magna Carta, actually. But getting back to the subject at hand, President Trump is engaging in a class action lawsuit. He brought forth, as part of the presentation, several people who had been censored because they had said things that ran contrary to the received opinions on big tech with regard to several issues. One of them was any criticism of the election of 2020 and how that came about. Again, I want to be euphemistic here because we're still not allowed to talk about that. The issue of the pandemic, any alternative medicines that were discussed at the time, questions of gain of function research, any of that kind of topic was off limits. And also any criticism of the official remedy to the pandemic, which is the vaccine. And I'm not here to get into that. I don't have any information. I'm not a doctor, and I do actually think that we have to be careful about those things because that is a question that's up to the doctors. And just as a matter of public record, I will note that I have been fully vaccinated. And I suppose, at my age, I weighed the math. I looked at the math. I weighed and measured the odds of either catching the biological weapon or the ill effects of the virus. And I decided that it was worth it to take the virus because I want to get the hell out of the house. I want to start functioning again. But that's a personal decision. I'm not here to advocate one way or the other. That's something that, you as an informed consumer needs to look at and decide. Which brings me to my next issue. This one I don't think is all that controversial, shouldn't be that controversial. And I certainly would be pretty PO'd if I got pulled off of this one. But that is the comments made by U.S. Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene of Georgia when she compared the present regime's policies regarding vaccination to Nazi stormtroopers. Now, I think that the comparison is overblown. I don't think we've reached that level of Nazism in this country that we can make that comparison yet. I don't for a minute discount the possibility of that. But at the same time, I get it. That's free speech. You can, in the broad sense, make that argument. You could say, look, this is an authoritarian approach that does remind one of more openly and more vigorously authoritarian actions by a more open and vigorous authoritarian regime, Hitler's Germany. And the reaction is, oh, well, she's being accused of anti-Semitism. Well, first of all, she wasn't praising the Nazis. I mean, quite the opposite. She was criticizing them and saying, we're almost as bad as they are. So how is that like supporting Hitler and the Nazis? Secondly, and by the way, her comments had nothing to do with Jews. Secondly, I had to sit through and endure 4 years of hearing comments in the New York Times, the Washington Post, the nightly news, day after day, week after week, interminably, with essays and including from Jewish organizations, may I add, comparing President Donald Trump to Hitler, comparing President Donald Trump's followers to Nazis. It was, you couldn't hear, you'd never hear the end of it. Every comment he'd make, they would take out the microscope and there would be the dissection. Oh, this is like something that was said in 1933 by Himmler. And oh, we have the proof. And they put him up with swastikas and he looked a certain way and made a certain hand gesture. And oh my God, that's a Nazi salute. And I mean, we heard, talk about, like a QAnon type analysis. I mean, under the microscope, every single gesture, oh, this is another, And this was by responsible people. I remember listening to the podcast from the New York Times where it was almost like typical. They started out, with Nazi music, boom, 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 boom. And then they would say, and Donald Trump is doing this and that. I think in that case, they were talking about the cages, which Obama built and which now Biden is tripling in size. And, I don't recall anything said about all of these establishment people, this ruling elite, if you will, having something against Jews or being anti-Semitic or being called to resign or at least being called to shut up. I don't recall any of that. And in fact, I was uncomfortable about those comments because I did see permutations in there of anti-Semitism, if I might say. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, what was the nature of the analysis of Donald Trump? Successful businessman, right? Outspoken, didn't play the ball the way he was supposed to. He was kind of a loose cannon on the deck. Isn't that how Jews have been described historically by anti-Semites? Money, Karl Marx is on the Jewish question. He talks about, the Jews worship money. It's one of the most anti-Semitic tracts ever written. By the way, the left finally walked away from it after World War II because it didn't look good. And they're traders and they're in business and, and all these other things that they have attributed to Jews. Isn't that what they were saying about Trump? And that he lies, right? Which, by the way, is ridiculous because he didn't lie. In fact, the thing they hated about Trump the most was that he was telling the truth. Oh, this is how Jews were portrayed, wasn't it? That they were deceptive and they were sneaky and that they were not, playing it straight. I mean, this was the attack on Trump. And by the way, it's the traits of the Jews. And then, to go back to Marx, I mean, I actually wrote a book about this on the Jewish question, his pamphlet. The traits that Karl Marx attributed to Jews, and they are traits that are part of Jewish culture. Independence, self-reliance, success, the right to trade goods and services and ideas, in a sense, operating a little bit outside of the control of the prince, the government. This is why Jews were hated and feared. And this is what Marx hated because he wanted to abolish those things in order to create a communist world where everyone is de facto equal, like kind of an ant colony where everyone is lobotomized. So the Jews were an obstacle to that because of their embrace of these attributes. But yet, weren't those the same attributes that were embraced by the founders of the American Republic? Yes, they were. America is a nation of businessmen, of small, of entrepreneurs, farmers, manufacturers. It's the first society in history to honor that. It's we're free thinkers. We're able to function. That's why I hate the censorship so much. We trust ourselves as individuals to think and to function on our own. And we're basically very honest. And so the attack against Trump and the attack against the Trump movement was, in the very broad sense, anti-Semitic, frankly, as was Marx and as is the entire left-wing enterprise. And yet the attack on Marjorie Taylor Greene, she's not at all. She's pro-Israel. And she contrasts quite well, might I suggest, with Ilhan Omar, the left-wing icon who compares Israel to the Taliban, or to Rashida Tlaib from Detroit, who said that when she thinks about the Holocaust, it makes her feel warm all over. You know, you want to talk about outright anti-Semitism. You know, I mean, Omar's criticizing, you know, Jewish loyalties and this kind of stuff. These are old anti-Semitic tropes. Where are the people who are screaming now about Greene, talking about the pandemic policies? Where are they on that? You know, this is just another one of these left-wing memes. It's ridiculous. Anyway, I'm going to get into some other stuff here before David comes on. 617-396-4958. You're welcome to join the program. What is on your mind? You're welcome to change the subject. This is an open line show. As long as you keep within the propriety of community standards, you're welcome to join and talk about anything you'd like. And if it's too hot for YouTube, I have a little dashboard here. I could take YouTube off if I think it's going to be censored. Not that that'll work. They'll probably censor it anyway. 617-396-4958. 617-396-4958. All right. Now, the next issue I want to get into is very controversial. And I'm going to be very, very careful. The prime minister, the president of Haiti, Jovenel Moise, was assassinated yesterday. Gunmen dressed as DEA agents, I guess, entered the house and shot him to death at point blank. They shot his wife, who has survived, and I think they shot several other people. Now, we don't know anything about their background. Generally speaking, when I look at the Boston Globe today and the New York Times today, because I've been trying to follow how the establishment is covering this story, and you can always tell things by that. You need to, look, the New York Times, these outlets don't lie, but they slant a story to fit a narrative, and they omit things that don't fit that narrative. That's a given. That's how you have to read them. And what they're doing in a subtle way, by means of sophistic language and legerdemain and what French scholar Elaine Benescon called the language of totalitarianism, indirection, doublespeak, dual meaning, obfuscation, vagary, the embellishment and flowery language that makes you feel like they're smart. What they're saying about Jovenel Moise is that he was a potential dictator, that he had authoritarian tendencies. That's how it's being portrayed. I think that he was asking for elections in the fall, and they were like, well, you should step down. And, there might have been some controversies around that, possibly. But that's been the focus of the portrayal. And I think that's the setup to explain eventually why he was murdered. And that basically they're blaming him when you get down to it. But there are some questions about the fact that he's on video now criticizing the Clinton Foundation. There, I said it. Okay? That there is a video circulating right now. It hasn't been taken down yet, at least as far as I know, in which he spoke at an event that was by which President candidate at the time, Donald Trump, spoke, in which he pleaded for the candidate to look into the Clinton Foundation and the fact that the Clinton Foundation was receiving untold amounts of money, millions, maybe even billions of dollars, under the guise of helping with earthquake relief in Haiti, which is a very poor country. And according to his statements, only like 2% of it actually went to Haiti. And that it was the people of Haiti were being ripped off. I mean, the Clinton Foundation is a very dark subject. I'm not in any position to discuss it. It should be investigated. I mean, they certainly investigated the Trump Foundation, and they found a few things. I think he gave away a picture, right, and something, and they're like spending 2 years on that one. Well, they're investigating the Trump organization, and apparently his CEO received a perk. I think that Trump paid for his granddaughter's tuition to college, or he gave him a free car. This is a man who'd worked loyally for the Trump organization for 40 years. And there's questions of whether or not he paid taxes on that in the state of New York. So they haul him off in chains over this. But the Clinton Foundation, oh, no. I mean, it's interesting. The minute Hillary Clinton, by the way, lost the election, the Clinton Global Initiative was disbanded, and we never heard from that again. Oh, God only knows what they were involved in. You know, I mean, it's so ugly to even think about. You know, and there's other things, maybe the Clinton people, who knows? I mean, I don't want to go into that area. I can't on this venue. But let's just use our imaginations a little bit and think about how potentially corrupt that is. But anyways, the Haitian people were pretty upset about it. And there were Haitians protesting outside of Clinton campaign offices in the United States. The media did not talk about this at all. It was completely blacked out. Nobody, I mean, I'd be surprised if anyone watching this program right now even knows anything about this. I hope I'm not banned. I'm not saying anything here in terms of pointing a finger of accusation, because I have no idea. What I can only say is that the protests against Clinton by the Haitian people was blacked out, and the protest by Jovenel Moïse, who became president, was blacked out. And he, you know, now he's been assassinated. I'm not going to say more about it, okay? I have no idea, but it's the first thing I thought about when I heard that he was assassinated. And I looked into it, and I found out that, yeah, this is something that's going on. And there's a good reporter by the name of Jack Prosobiak who's written about this. I'm going to leave it there. I really don't think I want to go further with it, other than to say this. People who question matters such as this are accused of engaging in conspiracy theories. They're criticized, they're denounced, they're told that they're ignorant and stupid. And, you know, we don't want to think of, and I understand that in a way, because we don't want to think about our leaders is involved in such ugly things and corruption. I can't get my mind. I mean, I don't know if I believe it. I can't get my mind around it. You know, part of you is like, no, that couldn't be. You know, we have these people that we exalt. I mean, Hillary Clinton, for God's sakes, is put up on the cover of magazines and revered, and, you know, this great, glorious figure. We don't quite know why, but she is. But we don't want to think about them as involved in certain ugly activities, right? And I'm, again, not saying what they are, and I'm not saying they happened. I'm just bringing this up as a matter of principle. Of course, unless it's Donald Trump, in which case he's peeing on prostitutes. I don't know, whatever. Anyway, the point is that, you know, we don't want to think about these things because they're ugly, because we don't want to go there. We don't want to think even in general about our fellow human beings involved in these sorts of things, let alone people that we are convinced we should revere because they get larger than life presentation, almost an idolatrous amount of attention. And it's difficult to think about it, but I think I think that we should, because conspiracies happen all the time. We need to be responsible about it when we analyze things based on fact. We need to avoid painting a brush of conspiracy against any group, like based on their ethnicity or race. I mean, that's ridiculous. Groups aren't, they don't think alike. Conspiracies can only be entered into by individuals. You can't have the entire country enter into a conspiracy, or an entire ethnic group enter into a conspiracy, unless every single person in there is secretly, doing something to subvert the law or subvert will, and they're mechanizing. It just can't happen. Conspiracies can only be hatched by a small group of people, and sometimes they can be coordinating with or interacting with other small groups of people. But nevertheless, it can't be an entire ethnic group. They cannot be involved in a conspiracy. Now, having said that, when people criticize people like me, people like you maybe watching, for bringing up conspiracy theories, and again, they are theories. No one's saying anything is a fact. You have to speculate, which is why, by the way, the founding fathers recognized the right to free speech, free press, free association, because they wanted us to examine conspiracies. They happen all the time as a way to keep society honest. We always should be trying to examine and expose conspiracy. That's what the media is supposed to do. That's what our journalists are supposed to do. And yet, some of the same people who would attack me and attack others for raising questions of conspiracy, when, for example, a critic of the Clinton Foundation is suddenly murdered, right? And by the way, while I'm here, I'm going to mention another one. And again, I'm not saying that this happened. I'm simply juxtaposing a few facts. About 3 weeks ago, there was this young journalist by the name of Christopher Sign, excuse me. He worked for CBS News, not exactly a right-wing outlet, pretty mainstream guy. He worked in Birmingham, Alabama. He was young. I think he was in his late 30s, early 40s, 3 young children at home, married, by all accounts, a happy person, a successful guy, somebody who was not in any way depressed, somebody who enjoyed his work. On Friday, he wraps up the day at the CBS studios, joking around with his colleagues. The next morning, he's found dead in his apartment, and it is deemed to be a suicide. Now, we don't know what actually happened because we haven't heard anything since then. I haven't seen anything in the news about this. But what we do know about this journalist is that he happened to have been at an airport in 2016. I think he was probably traveling somewhere, maybe for business or personal. And while he was there, he witnessed the tarmac meeting between Bill Clinton and Attorney General Loretta Lynch. He saw Clinton go on Lynch's airplane, and he reported on it. Now, again, this is not some right-wing guy. This is a CBS, mainstream, probably liberal, not political. But he did what journalists are supposed to do. He reported on a story that he happened to fall into. I mean, this was a former president of the United States going on board the Attorney General's airplane and then spending about a half an hour and then coming off. And the story became international. It was a huge story. Loretta Lynch was interviewed about it, and she referred to it as, quote, a boneheaded move on her part, unquote, one of the dumbest things she'd ever done as Attorney General. It didn't look good. And the fact of the matter is that it was about a week after that meeting on the tarmac that FBI Director James Comey gave a press conference in which he announced that the charges against Hillary Clinton for the top secret emails and the classified information and the other things that she was being investigated for were to be dropped, right? There'll be no charges brought against her. And this, by the way, was after he laid out the crimes, which actually were fairly significant. But we're not going to do anything about it. So it raised in the mind of the public the possibility that this tarmac meeting, because after all, Loretta Lynch as Attorney General is Comey's boss. I mean, the FBI works in the Department of Justice. That there might have had something to do with it. And it just didn't look right. It was a very unpleasant story for the Clintons. And Christopher Sine ended up going on and writing a little book about it. He was a journalist. He was covering a story. And he was getting death threats on top of it, which is one of the reasons why he decided to take the job in Birmingham, Alabama. He felt threatened. He felt like he wanted to get out of New York or wherever he was and do like a kind of a quieter place. All right, enough that those who are pointing fingers, wagging their tongues, if you will, at people who speculate on potential conspiracies, many of these same people are the same people who spent 4 years talking about the biggest conspiracy theory to come down the pike since, certainly in my lifetime, since the Kennedy assassination, actually. If you think about it, it's one of the biggest conspiracy theories in American history. And that is that candidate and then President Donald J. Trump was spying for the Russians. And in that capacity, whether he was spying willingly or because of blackmail or because of money or however it happened, he was colluding with his masters in Russia, Putin particularly, to steal the election of 2016. Isn't that what this whole thing was all about? Collusion? Collusion for what? They were claiming that he stole the election and he worked with the Russians to do it because he was a Russian spy or spying for Russia. He was an American spying for Russia. And that the Russians, wasn't that what the whole dossier was about? That the Russians were blackmailing him? Turned out to be a phony dossier, and they now admit that. But yet they used it as, to get FISA court permission to spy on Trump through his aides and eavesdrop, which is something, by the way, they're still doing. It just came out that they were spying on Tucker Carlson. I could talk about that briefly, but part of a surveillance state. And then they continued to try to frame Trump as a spy for the Russians. Think about how ridiculous that is. What a cockamamie, absurd conspiracy theory that is. A president of the United States working for the Russians? Really? I mean, think about that in the context, not just of the United States, but of any country. Would you have like a head of state in any country, a king even, or an emperor, or a prime minister working for another country and against their own country's interests? Literally. Now, they might do stuff that's against their country's interests, but I'm talking like literally. In other words, they were saying Trump is literally, communicating with Putin to steal the election. And this went on for 4 years. This cost the taxpayer $40 million to pay Mueller and his brown shirts to go span across the world, picking up people to coerce them into making some kind of, admission, which nobody ever did. They put Manafort in solitary confinement. Now, he might have been involved in some crimes. They had nothing to do with Trump. The only reason he was charged with those crimes is because he was Trump's campaign manager for a while, and they wanted to get him to say something to back up this cockamamie story. He was a lobbyist for Ukraine, and he took favors from Ukraine, probably. I think that's what he was charged with. How is that any different than what Podesta was doing, who was Clinton's campaign manager? Apparently he did the same thing. So these are crimes, and maybe they should be prosecuted, although I wonder if it wasn't selective. But putting it aside, this is what Mueller spent 3 years doing, and leaking to the media these various ridiculous charges, all to keep Trump off balance and to try to remove, ultimately, Trump from office because he had allegedly stolen the election. That's what that was all about. Now, of course, if you talk about election legitimacy in 2020, and I'm not going to, you're banned. That's forbidden now. It's the shoe is on the other foot. Now you're a terrorist if you talk about it. So anyways, I don't want to go further on that one. I just wanted to bring it up to note that there are conspiracy theories and there are conspiracy theories. And when you see a conspiracy theory, you have to take a look at who's saying it and what do they have to gain and what's backing it. And I think we can say clearly what that was regarding the conspiracy theory against Trump, which was absolute crap. Anyway, I'm going to wrap it up. I'll be coming back in about 20 minutes with David. I want to thank you for joining me. Charles Moscowitz. I'm doing this Monday through Friday, live, 12 to 1, roughly. And you're welcome to call in, 617-396-4958. You might want to write it down. You can call tomorrow if you'd like. 617-396-4958 is the phone number. You're welcome to check out my books. They're available at Amazon Books. At least they still are. My latest book, The Satanic Conspiracy. That one actually is doing pretty well. I mean, better than my usual books. Check it out on Amazon Books, Charles Moscowitz. And I guess on that note, I want to just say God bless you all and God bless America. Thank you for joining me.